This is the Financially Simple Podcast, a show dedicated to destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner. And now, here's your host, pizza-loving, certified financial planner, Justin Goodbread.
Welcome to Financially Simple. Today, we're going to continue our deep dive into the subject of building operations for maximum value growth. I've titled today's episode, The Top 3 Operational Problems. I don't know about you, but in East Tennessee, I like to get into a boat, or I like to get a rod and reel and go wet a line, as we would call it. I was watching Andy Griffith with my kids, and I like the theme song where they're whistling and you have Andy and Opie walking down to the fishing hole with a cane pole. And I have many, many memories with my dad and many friends around fishing. One fish in particular in East Tennessee I love, and that is trout fishing. Here in East Tennessee, they actually stock, the Department of Natural Resources puts trout into the cold rivers beneath the dams that are part of the TVA system. And you can get out with a fly rod, or if you're like me, you want to sink a Joe fly, which is a type of lure, or maybe you want to use a red hook with a worm. My brother and I went fishing one day here in the Tennessee River, and we had this competition to see who could catch the most fish. Lo and behold, I gave my brother the only red hook that I had in my tackle box, and he wore me slap out. It was like I didn't even exist. I would have cast the exact same worm using night crawlers into the stream right beside my brother's, and the trout would hit his red hook over my shiny brass hook or gold hook every time. So I like trout. Well, a type of fish that's similar to the trout, one that I'm dreaming one day I can go catch and just enjoy, is salmon. You know, salmon, they're both in the east and the west of the United States, but they're an interesting fish. It's because of their migratory habits, which I think is just so intriguing. No doubt you've watched something on the Discovery Channel highlighting these fish to where they begin their life in a small river somewhere and they swim downstream to the ocean, where they spend the majority of their life in the ocean or in the deep, deep depths of the ocean. And they grow, sometimes depending on the species, for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And ultimately they end up near the end of their life. In fact, this quest is the end of their life. They swim back up the river opposite the current. They swim back up the river to where they were originally born, up in the rivers to where they will spawn. So around September to November every year, these adult salmon who are ready to spawn, they leave the ocean and they go swimming upstream. And no doubt you've seen the Discovery Channel or the pictures to where these fish are jumping up waterfalls, and things like bald eagles are there waiting to swoop down to get them a lunch, or even the grizzly bear. I think it's very interesting how these salmon, I mean, these fish are 15, 20, 30 pound fish are swimming upstream, and these grizzly bears who are hungry are just there waiting, and they catch these flying fish in their mouth. Or you see the young cub who inevitably runs out and tries to splash through the water, and then old wise mama or papa's over there saying, son, let me show you how you do this. But nonetheless, these fish fight against all odds and swim up current. In fact, this salmon run, as it's been called, is so vital to our environment and to the ecosystems of the various estuaries and the various areas that they provide, that there's actually mandates for protection. So, for example, if you come to a weir dam, WEI, a weir dam, it's often a small dam below a big dam. It's just there to pull some water back for some reason or another. But if you come up to a weir dam, oftentimes there'll be what's called a fish ladder. It's like a ladder that the fish can climb. And what it is it allows the salmon to swim upstream without having to challenge the weir dam, which would be just about impossible for them to do. I've even seen bypasses, almost like a bypass around a city, like you and I would drive in our car. In Atlanta, we just drove through Atlanta this last week, and we took 285 bypass around the outside of Atlanta as opposed to going through downtown Atlanta. So it was a bypass. Well, these salmon, they'll often build bypasses so the salmon could go around a particular infrastructure that we've built for whatever reason. So ultimately, the salmon reach their genesis. They reach the very location to where their life began, their beginnings, their root. Now, I've talked for about 3 minutes here, and I want to give you the reason for that. I want you to put this backdrop in your mind, and let's talk about operational problems. As you can imagine, I'm going to talk about swimming upstream. But before we talk about swimming upstream, I want you to think about the basic discussion points that you'll have around operations when you start trying to figure out the problems that occur. Things like you may say there's inadequate experience, or there's poor quality output, or perhaps you had a regulatory failure. There was a failure in a particular product. Maybe your liability claims increased. Could be you have excess capacity. There could be production downtime or workload imbalance. It could be that you have poor customer retention or low, what's called value add activities. You could end up having very low margins, or there could be very poor throughput. Inevitably, there's some type of failure that you've identified. There's a breakdown somewhere in the system. Now, everybody's company could be different. Everybody's failure could be different, but inevitably we see failures. I was dealing with a company here this week, and they were having a high employee turnover, high turnover. There's a failure somewhere in the system. So how do we track back the failures? No matter which failure we have, we're going to have to swim upstream. So I want to give you a scenario of a case that I've been working on and how we track back the failure. So in this particular case, we had poor customer retention. We had a group of customers that they would come in, had a lot of customers coming in, but we weren't retaining them. And the business owner could not figure out what was going on. So what do I ask? I began asking questions of why. Well, why do we have poor customer retention? And at this point, I want you to picture that salmon. We just embarked trying to come to our homestead to find the problem. So I asked the question, well, why do we have poor customer retention? And with that question, we swam upstream, and the client said, well, it's because we keep having to redo our work, or rework, as some people will call it. We're having to constantly do over our work. Okay, there's the problem, Justin. Really, that's the problem. Well, why are we having to do the work over and over and over again? Oh, we just swam upstream again. And the client said, well, I don't know. So it came to the fact that there was inconsistencies in the execution. The process was flawed. There was a structural problem with the process of delivery to the client. And they said, well, that must be it. We must have the problem of inconsistency in our execution. There's our source. And I said, well, time out. Why? Why what? Why do we have inconsistency in our execution? So we had to think for a second. The client, it took about a week or so. He came back and he said, well, it's because we are having production downtime. Whenever we're down, and this particular system was a manufacturing company, but whenever the systems were down, they would end up having to hurry really fast to catch up the orders. And so he said, well, it's because of the downtime. We have way too much downtime on our line, and therefore it's causing inconsistency in our execution. I said, okay, that's possibly one area. What about the knowledge level that's possibly creating the downtime? Or what about the quality control inputs and outputs within your organization or within this particular system? All three of which could have been the problem. But then I asked the question, well, why do we have downtime? Why do we have inadequate knowledge on how to deal with this? Why is it that we have poor, very poor inputs and outputs?
You are listening to Financially Simple, destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner.
Once again, we swam upstream and we came to the source. We came to the source, which was there was a upstream concentration. There was a concentration in a particular problem of this company's, and there was the source. That was the source of the problem. We couldn't ask why any further. We tried, but ultimately we wired ourselves to the source. Much like that salmon who leaves the ocean and they jump over rocks and they jump over logs and they jump up these waterfalls and they work around bypasses and they go up fish ladders and they avoid the swooping eagle and they avoid the grizzly bear who's trying to make a snack and the fisherman who's out trying to get them a snack. Ultimately, the salmon arrives at the destination or the genesis of life. They arrive at the point to where the problem, it will be then resolved only for the next generation to move and repeat the cycle. In your business, there are going to be multiple steps. And the only way you're going to find the genesis, if you will, the very location to where the problem exists, is to swim upstream. And it's going to constantly boil down to the question of why. Why? Why? And you've got to be willing to challenge the answers. Challenge them. Why? And ask why until ad nauseum, till you cannot answer why anymore. And with that, you come to the three most common problems. The problems in every business comes down to three things. Number one is it's inefficient in the system or the throughput. From start to finish, there's inconsistencies. There's inefficient. There's problems in the process. Very seldom do I have a process in my business that doesn't need to be tweaked. Very seldom. In fact, I'm constantly trying to figure out where the inefficiencies are. So much so that now our team members are actually looking for inefficiencies in our process. That is the number one cause for problems in your business, is often inefficiencies. Now, that begs the question that you actually have a thorough process. Your inefficiency may not be that you just don't have a process. I'm making the assumption that you have a process at some point, and it's developed enough to where you can identify the efficiencies or inefficiencies thereof. But the number one root problem that I see in business is inefficiencies in process. The second thing I see is excess or unused capacity. Excess or unused capacity. Excess capacity means that you have too many team members if you're running a company which is in production mode. It may be that you're a dental practice and you've staffed up too much. I was dealing with a dentist this last week, and the dentist asked the question. He said, "Justin, am I overstaffed?" And I said, "I've been waiting for that question." That was actually bullet point number 2, is you're overstaffed. And you have two solutions to the problem. You can decrease staff, thus streamline capacity, or you could ramp up top line flow, which is marketing, and thus utilize capacity. But right now you have excess capacity. Therefore, you're running into a major operational issue. So oftentimes you have excess capacity with personnel, let's say a service business, or you may have excess capacity inside your building. I know a school that meets once a week. You often even see this in churches. Churches will meet once a week. That means they have a building that's set dormant for another 6 days a week. There's capacity there that can be utilized for whatever the church's ministry is, or for revenue generation. There are colleges. In fact, I go to an event at a college here in town that they have classrooms which are not being utilized. So they open the classrooms up for rent for the purpose of making money to the public. And therefore, they're using their excess capacity. So oftentimes inefficiencies or inefficiency in operations come from number 2, excess capacity. And the number 3, if it's not inefficiency with the throughput, it's inconsistent execution. Inconsistent execution. I'm actually dealing with this right now in our office. I wrote an email to a prospective client I never dreamed I would write. The client, which could greatly use my help, and maybe they'll choose to use our help. It's a sizable business. The business needs somebody like me to come in and help them. But this individual came in, they said, "Justin, I need your help in this one area." And as I was asking questions about other areas, they were realizing that there's more to meets the eye. However, they felt like that their team was totally built out, and they only wanted me to serve as a capacity in one area. The problem is I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to come into an organization, I'm going to look holistically through the process. And so whenever our structures or our systems in our organization came back that we're going to act as quarterback and we're going to help that client reach their goals and work with their advisors, this particular client wanted me to not work in that capacity. He only wanted me to fill one particular need. And I could have chosen to work with him. But if I'd taken that choice to work in that capacity, then it would be inconsistent with every other system that I have in our organization. So I wrote an email basically saying that so-and-so, while I value and I really am humble that you reached out for my help, the way that our firm is set up is in this structure. It's this execution model. And what you're asking me to do does not fit into our particular system. And therefore, if I were to do this, it would be a custom system, which I cannot manage on a scalable model. And so I actually wrote an email saying that if you choose to work with us, it's going to be in this capacity based on our current execution process. But if you don't choose to work with us, fine. That's fine. We're just not the right firm for you. See, I could have chosen the process of catching the money, driving revenue, but it would have created a problem with inconsistency in execution, the third biggest fault of operations. And that's the last thing I wanted to do. The last thing I wanted to do was have a system in place that works and deviate from that system for 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 different possible clients or orders. So with the salmon in mind, as you go upstream from the problem, as you identify it, more often than not, you're going to find out that it's typically one of those 3 problems. It is inefficiency throughout the system. It's excess capacity, either with personnel or equipment, or maybe even talent, which is personnel, or it's inconsistent execution. Problems with the execution, not the system itself, but the execution. So what about your particular operational system right now? Do you see these 3 problems in the system? Be like the little salmon. Well, I say little, some of them are quite large, but be like the salmon. Swim upstream. Think about the salmon who works and fights all day long to come to the root, to the genesis of their existence. You've got to do the same thing with the problems that you and I face in our businesses. You have to swim upstream. You have to ask why, until you get to the very genesis, the beginning, this major underlying problem. And with that, we're going to wrap up this particular podcast. Hey guys, check out financiallysimple.com. We reworked it here recently. There's all sorts of cool new features. Our debt course just went live. It's a debt course for business owners on how to reduce your debt. Check it out. It's on financiallysimple.com. If you like the podcast, do me a favor, share it with a friend. If you don't like the podcast, hey, share it anyways. As I say every week, life is hard, life is good, and life can be frustrating. Trying to find the root cause of problems, oh my goodness, it'll make me pull out what little bit of hair I have on my head. Hey, look, money, business, it doesn't have to be frustrating. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Y'all go out and make it a great day.
You have been listening to the Financially Simple podcast. The information in this show is for informational purposes only. This show is not investment advice. Instead, seek help from a competent financial advisor. Justin Goodbread, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Heritage Investors, a registered investment advisor.